Hey, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast. My name is Michael David Morales, aka Mo, and I am honored to have my friend here, also named Dave. He's a veteran of the United States Army, very recently retired. We hope you enjoy this episode. Dave, welcome to the show, man.
I appreciate you having me on. This is pretty awesome.
Dude, this is actually like years in the making. Remember when we sat on the dropped gate of that Humvee and we did
Yep.
like it was like 5 years ago.
Yeah. That was in Fort Hunter Liggett, wasn't it?
Yeah, man.
I think it was.
Beautiful Fort Hunter Liggett where there's maybe one tree and a lot of rocks. So
There's a whole lot of rocks. But
yeah,
it was
man.
beautiful. And that was some good times. Whatever happened to that video clip?
I've got it actually, dude. I'll have to share it with you. Remind me. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll put it on my social media.
When we're both famous, that'll be fun.
Right? Yeah, that'll be the before they were famous clip, right?
There you go.
Well, hey, to my audience, I've invited Dave on today for a couple reasons. One, he and I have known each other for over a decade now, I believe, and we were in the same Army unit. And Dave was a Chief Warrant Officer in the military in the United States Army, and I'm going to have to explain to my audience what that is because honestly, I'm in the Army and I don't even know what Chief Warrant Officers do, and so he's going to bring some some light to that. But we've had a lot of fun together in the Army, and Dave specifically is going to go over a little bit about what he's done in the Army and how long he's been and stuff like that. But he has a wealth of knowledge, so get ready. You're gonna glean some good insight today from Dave. So, Dave, why don't you give us a quick background of who you are, when you joined the Army, how you became a Chief Warrant Officer, what all that is. Just give me something.
Okay. Yeah, you got it. I appreciate the intro. I don't know if I can live up to all that hype, but so back in 2001, I was in a speech class and somebody gave up a speech. It was a persuasion speech. And she talked about the Army Reserves. Now, I talked to my parents and thought about the military when I was in high school, but it never went beyond a couple visits from the recruiters, and that was it. But this persuasion speech had me thinking a little bit more deeply. I was an adult at that point, at about 22 years old. And needless to say, she persuaded me. So within 2 weeks of that persuasion speech, I had my hand raised up to the square and I was in LA saying I'm joining the Army. So it was interesting. I went through the process, and as far as the job I wanted, I was making steps quicker than I had planned. So I didn't know what I was doing. This is like something that I just thought, you know what? I've got weekends available. I'd love the idea of having some military skills and training. And yeah, let's do this. So when I went through all the training and I passed the ASVAB and everything else, and that was when they pulled me in and said, all right, these are the jobs that you have available to you. And the Army Reserves, the job amount is just not as extensive as in the active duty Army, mainly because in the active duty Army, you can select any job and then that will dictate where you go. So you could say, yeah, I want to be a heavy wheeled mechanic. Okay, well, the heavy wheeled mechanic spot that's available is in New Jersey. Okay, right. It doesn't matter that you live in California, you're moving to New Jersey and that's where you're starting your Army career. But in the reserves, it's different. In the reserves, they try to stay to your local commuting area and what units are available and what positions they have available for those areas. And so for me and my MOS, I qualified to be a mail sorter, a janitor, and a cook. And then the cook came with a $3,000 bonus. And honestly, I've always enjoyed cooking. So it was a pretty easy decision. I just made the decision on the spot, said, all right, sign me up for that. Let's get moving. When I signed up, though, it was 6-month delay. And then I started my training at the beginning of 2002. So I did my training. It was a great time. And then in a nutshell, since there's a lot of years in between, I made the jump to warrant officer shortly after I extended my military contract when I was just earning the rank of E6. E6 is staff sergeant, and this all happened about 2006 when I made that jump. In 2007 and 8 is when I really got into that warrant officer thing. Honestly, I didn't know what a warrant officer was until I'm not even kidding. And the more I got into the military, and the more I run into soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines, the more I discover that they don't really know what warrant officers are
Right.
unless they've been to a certain level of command.
Sure.
So I saw a recruiter, and he's a warrant officer recruiter. Now, incidentally, he was an E7. So I don't know why enlisted ranks are recruiting for officer ranks, but that was what's going on. He was just a recruiter for that. And so I made the jump. I did that. I thought to myself, if I'm already in this much, I might as well go in this different direction. And I'm glad I did. It was very interesting. Did you want me to get into my deployments, or do you want me to get into warrant officer candidate course?
Yeah. So before we get to deployments, because I don't even know which deployment stories you're going to tell, and I'm excited for any and all of them, because there's some really good ones and funny ones. But before we get to that, Dave, what does it mean to be a warrant officer? Because most people, when they hear about the Army, they hear, well, you can either be enlisted or you can be an officer. But then there's this warrant officer that's kind of in between-ish, and like nobody really knows. In fact, for my audience out there, there's what's called the chief mafia, because chiefs, they just kind of they kind of know things that other people don't. They get to do things that other people don't get to do. Like you mentioned when you were an enlisted man, about you were putting on staff sergeant, and then you decided to go warrant. So like, what's that? I mean, what's the school for that? Why choose that path? What are the perks? I mean, what did you like? What did you like about it? Tell me a little bit about that.
Great questions. And you're right there. It's so it is a different world. And I failed to point out that to become a warrant officer, you first have to be an E5 or greater. So you have to already be a non-commissioned officer of some kind, of some rank. And what happens there, once you are in that position, you can make the jump. Now, making the jump. So what is a warrant officer? That was one of your questions. A warrant officer falls in between enlisted ranks and officer ranks. So you have what is known as like the private to sergeant enlisted ranks, and those are the enlisted ranks. They and I trust me when I say I mean this with ever much love that I can say it. They are the worker bees. They are the ones who make things happen. All of those are the ones you say, I need this done. Can you make it happen? And they do it. So, and then you have, in between that, you have the warrant officers. Now, the warrant officers are specialists in fields. So specifically, I was a warrant officer who specialized in food and food service. There are a couple different versions of my warrant officer or warrant officers that deal with food. One deals with food safety and only food safety, and they're branched out of the medical field. And then there is my MOS, which is 922 Alpha, but that is a food warrant officer. And what we do mostly is manage dining facilities and manage commodity movement. So, and I have some stories related to both of those. Certainly I've done it long enough. So, but as far as that, the rank and the hierarchy, you have the enlisted, you have the warrant officers, and then you have the regular officers. And some people call them RLOs, the real life officers, right? Because the warrant officers are just pretend. But we have the warrant officers who are the specialists in chosen fields. I chose a field because of my background as a 9-2 golf, which is a culinary specialist, which is basically an Army cook. So I started
Right.
out as an enlisted Army cook, just in the kitchens, moving pans around, getting grease burns, doing the whole thing. And
Yeah.
then, so as far as salute rank structure, that's how that goes. So enlisted are supposed to and are expected to salute warrant officers, although most warrant officers don't care. But they will because that's customs and courtesies for the military. And then as far as that goes, then everybody salutes the RLOs, the real life officers there. But again, with the officers, so you've got the higher tier, then these are the lieutenants to generals.
Mhm.
They're the decision makers. They don't specialize in any specific area. They specialize in broad categories. So, for example, you'll have officers, quartermaster officers. Quartermaster officers will handle supply, distribution, and maintenance, and a lot of things that have to do with quartermaster. But besides that, and that's only to help manage, like when you have the structure of a unit, then you need managers, and a lot of officers, like lieutenants and captains in some cases, depending on the level of operations we're talking about, they're middle managers, and they have to handle broader category of areas.
Right. So, like, officers, right, give orders, and after an officer gives an order, the enlisted man or woman gives directives to fulfill those orders. Like, an officer says, "Hey, take that hill," and then the sergeant says, "Okay, here's how we're going to take the hill," and then tells his boys and girls this is how we're going to do it. Now, what do warrant officers do in terms of the information that they're giving? Like, who are they giving it to? Because, like, as a chaplain, I don't have any command authority. I'm never going to tell anybody to do anything. If I'm in a foxhole and things go bad, it's Private Snuffy that's going to be telling me what to do, but that's not what I do. If I understand it correctly, warrant officers are almost like advisors, and they're not really like, how does that work? So, like, if a commander needs something from you, Dave, like, what would he or she, like, what are you trying to do for them?
So a commander is going to utilize warrant officers for information, and a warrant officer is expected to be knowledgeable, deeply knowledgeable, certainly in his or her field, but also knowledgeable generally, technically, but generally. So specifically, it's not uncommon to find CW4s and 5s as advisors to generals. Like, that's their job. Forget what they've been doing. Now they're just advisors to generals. And that's, of course, the choice of the general if they choose to do that. But what we do, what warrant officers generally do, is we advise the commander what should be done for that category in order for the commander not to get put into prison. And that's kind of how it's put for us. It's like, listen, you keep your boss out of jail.
Yeah.
So if your boss comes to you and says, hey, Chief, I need to feed all these soldiers, and all we have is this old food that we had from yesterday, and it's been sitting out for a couple hours, but we just need to feed them. Well, if I was stupid, I'd say, go ahead, sir, you're the boss. But since I'm not stupid, at least I presume not to be stupid, instead what I do is I say, sir, I appreciate your intent, but we have to come up with another solution. This is not going to be adequate. What you're going to do is you're going to put a lot of soldiers in the hospital, and some might be injured severely by that. So we can't trust the food source. We're going to go a different route. I advise you to do something else. And as long as I've advised the commander, then the commander makes a decision. And it might be that the commander says, thanks, Chief, for your advice. I'm going to do that anyway. Okay.
Yeah. So on that, Dave, why don't you give me a real world example? One of your famous stories on advising as a food warrant. I mean, what's a story that sticks out for you that is like, man, I remember this one.
That's a good question. Well, so yes, do you want to hear the story about an entire training organization of 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers was fed nothing but chili dogs for about 4 meals?
That's exactly the story I'm looking for. So, I was trying to bait you and lead you into it. So this is a great
I know
story. Go with it.
you know my stories well. All right, so listen, we were in Fort McCoy, and I was a brand new warrant officer. I mean, I might have been a CW2, and if I was, then just barely. I think I was actually just barely a CW2. Very young warrant officer, just barely got. So, backstory: to get from your rank structures, first of all, the warrant officers just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. Very simple. And as far
Sure.
as the title, we're all cheap, pretty much. I mean, really, technically, the first one is just Mister. It doesn't have any nice title. You have to wait 2 years, and then you can get your 2. And that's how it goes. And then after that, you wait 6 years for the reserves. 6 years, and then you get your 3, 6 more years, 4, 6 more years, 5, if you're lucky enough to have that position available to you. I
Sure.
wasn't. I retired as a 4. But what? All right, the backstory of the chili dog story. All right, we're in Fort McCoy, and that's in Wisconsin, and there's a warehouse organization. Warehouse managers run very young. We're talking, this is as green as you can get for a company. This company has never had any operation, never had any training as a group, just barely stood up and had a butter bar lieutenant, and that's the lowest ranking real life officer that you can have, running the whole thing. Now, he was a go-getter, and he really was doing his best. And honestly, I think he is right now a fantastic officer. I bet he did great in his career. But this particular training exercise, it was so boring. We had a lot of lieutenant colonels and a lot of colonels, a whole lot of them. I don't remember any generals there, but we had a whole lot of lieutenant colonels and colonels, and it was
Right.
a very, very basic exercise. But we had in the warehouse, their organization, they have lessons to learn. They organized all wrong. And so they brought all their cargo in and put it in one spot. And I can't remember if they just organized it by meal, but they were getting it and then shipping it out to the locations just based on the meal. And not a single person looked at what the meal was. It just so happens that I'm sure that there's one person organizing by meal type. So you got breakfast over here, lunch over here, dinner over here, and another person organizing by meal type, like meal entree type or whatever, you know? So you got all the chili dogs in one location. Well, it just so happens that they were shipping out meals to all these locations, but they were exclusively chili dogs. And so the areas had nothing but chili dogs to eat. And I was hearing this throughout the day. They had it for dinner, they
Right.
had it for lunch and dinner the day before, and they were already coming to me that morning. And so they were already getting chili dogs, and they were serving up the cooks. To their credit, they were serving it up as differently as they could. They were like
Right.
frying the hot dogs, they were breaking it apart, they were doing all kinds of weird trickery with their meals, but
Sure.
it was still chili dogs. Chili dogs all day long. I had lieutenant colonels coming up to me saying, "Chief, why are we getting chili dogs and nothing but chili dogs to eat? This is too much. I
For
like
meals,
chili
not
dogs,
meals.
but yeah, it was over and over chili dog, chili dog, chili dog, chili dog for at least 1.5 days. And then we had a meeting. And this is a meeting, a very official meeting. They did it every night. And we had a lieutenant colonel running our company, or running the whole operation, which it should have been a colonel, but it was a high-speed lieutenant colonel and very outspoken. And then he
Very.
very outspoken. And is a dark amphitheater, dark theater-ish room with about 75 seats for about 100, and all the seats were filled. So it's 75 to 100 or so, and they're all filled up. They had monitors in the front, and people were lining up on the side, waiting for their turn to stand up and report. But
Right.
I didn't have to wait to report because I was getting reports throughout the whole meeting. The whole meeting, people were complaining about chili dogs. And I mean,
Everybody
it's
was.
great. That means it was running smoothly as an operation, right? If all their complaints are about chili dogs, right? But they kept coming up with chili dog complaints, and it's crazy because people were complaining about chili dogs, and I already knew the story. I just stand up, all right, yep, stand up, make Chief, what about this chili dogs? And I'd answer the issue, and then we move on. And I was taking as much ownership of it as possible, saying like, listen, all right,
Yeah.
we're fixing the problem. I'm working closely with the lieutenant over the warehouse, and we're going to get this squared away. We already got the first meals lined up; they're ready to go. It's not chili dogs, whatever, right?
Right.
I'm just trying to work this through, and then it's my turn to stand up and brief the colonel, and I'm standing on the side, and I'm just waiting my turn. Got my cue cards or my notes or whatever I had, and then I stand right up there, and he says, "Gee, you are not actually going to stand up for us right now, are you?"
And then he railed on you for some more, for a little bit more,
Oh,
right?
he sure did. Yeah. The chili dogs, I tell you, I've run into people over the years who still talk about that chili dog story. I mean,
They do.
organically, they still remember it.
Yeah.
But it was not my favorite time in the Army, but
Yeah. Yeah. But
it is
you're right.
fun.
In the Army, there's things that, I mean, there's a lot of what we say, hurry up and wait, right?
Yes.
We're really busy and then we're not. And for that time, luckily for us, things weren't, things were pretty simple. That's why we could rail on chili dogs. It wasn't good for you,
No.
but everybody else was having a good time at your expense. So I appreciated it. So, so David, how many deployments did you go on in your career?
I've been on 4-year-long deployments.
Wow.
My first
So you were
deployment
gone.
was
What does that mean? Like when you say a year deployment, what does it mean to ramp up? How long you actually in the country you're in, which we call in country, and then when you come
yeah.
back, like you explain that to my audience.
Sure. My first deployment was the longest one, and it was about 15 or 16 months deployment. So what happened there, we started and we went to a mobilization site. And now the reserve, this is unique to the reserves, and I'm sure the National Guard, because the active duty component, they are expected to be mobilized ready. So that means they are told they're going to go, and within days or weeks, they're gone, and they're going to that area. But for the reserves, because we do it part-time, they send us to a mobilization location where we get geared up and we get some meetings and trainings and that sort of thing last minute so that we're ready for this mobilization. That usually spans between 1 to 2 or 3 months, and then usually 1 to 2 months. So my first deployment, we did that. And then we were deployed for almost an entire 12-month period in Iraq. It was in Balad, Iraq. And that was in 2005 and 2006, back when the base was bombed regularly still. It was a strange thing when you're on the phone with your wife saying, "Hey, how you doing?" And then in the backgrounds or outside, you hear the sirens blaring. And the sirens indicate that bombs or mortars or rockets, they're coming down and at you. They're in your vicinity. So
Well,
the best thing you do is you get under a table or something to that effect. You get close to the ground. So it's unusual when you're on the phone with your wife and you don't want to alert her,
right.
but you still, so it wasn't uncommon for me to just crawl under the table, still on the phone, and
Wow.
say, "All right, honey, well, I think I need to wrap this one up. Okay, love you. Talk to you later." And then to get off the phone. But I mean, I was fortunate enough to have the ability to make phone calls and stay in communication with my family while gone. But that was one of the weird things. But so then you have your deployment and your deployment length, and that's usually predetermined, except for a few extenuating circumstances or things that issues with your replacing unit and that sort of thing that might come up, or extensions because of your mission. mission scope changes. But then after we're done with that deployment, we leave country. As you pointed out, that's what we call that when we're in country. We're over in our location, and
Yeah.
then and they also call that the theater of operations because that's where all the operations are happening for the audience. But then when we come back to the United States, we go to a demob site, and that's where we demobilize. We have mostly it's like 1 to 2 weeks. It's really a quick process nowadays.
Sure.
Anyway, it was a little longer back then, but it's usually right around 1 to 2 weeks. And it's usually comprised of decompression time and meetings to talk about what's going on, and in some cases we're turning in extra gear that we don't want to have on our books, like the ballistic vests and some other things like that.
Yeah.
And the plates.
So, so tell me about tell me a story from one of your deployments. It doesn't matter what kind or just something that stands out too. Was it one from that specific deployment or a different deployment?
I mean, I certainly have stories from that deployment. I wanted to tell another story though,
Sure.
because I think it might be interesting. Because I had another. I told you that I deal primarily with logistics, but specifically though, I was pointed out. It was my second to last deployment, so my third deployment, and just a few days before we left to Kuwait, which was our deployment location, they came to us as a group, as a supporting operations group, which is SPO. And I was a part of SPO for this particular deployment. And I was intended to manage commodities for this deployment, not the dining facilities, but the commodities. The commodities is just the flow of food from the sources and to our troops, to everybody, anybody who's out there. So that was my job for that time. And they instead said, we have another mission that we need to identify a logistics officer, a couple fuelers, and an ammo specialist. So just 4 people for this particular mission. It was to work with the special forces, and it was to be working with them in northern Iraq. And so they identified me to be their logistics officer. And of course I was kind of, they asked me, it was a silly question. They said, Chief, is your team going to be okay without you? What do you think my answer was?
Hey,
of course, they got this one. So, but they were a sharp crew. There are a couple staff sergeants on my team and a sergeant first class, and they handle business real well. So they sent me up north to Erbil to work with the special forces group, and it was the best deployment I ever had, mainly because of that 4 months. I was there for 4 months working with the special forces. I was fortunate enough not to have to worry about shaving and cutting my hair or wearing a uniform. I didn't have to do any of that. And I worked in a very small office, and I can't touch on too many of the details, but my specific job was to manage the contracts and their regularly revolving contracts for transportation companies in northern Iraq to move our products or to move anything. And that was my job, and not just food at this point. I was the logistics officer generally. And it was cool because I worked with the French Special Forces and I worked with the British Special Forces, because whenever they needed to move things, then I was the one that would move them for them. And at first they would just assign their own trucks and pay on the side, and they would have, it was just convoluted, and I hated it. And I told them eventually, I said, listen, how about I contract your truck for you? I'll get it at a fraction of the cost you're getting it, and we'll just have them all come in. I'll let you know when it's arrived so you can pack it. We'll just drive it to your location. You can pack it how you like and then put it back in our convoy. And they're like, that sounds great. So I also speak French, so it worked really well to work with the French Special Forces, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this mission. It was great. I was working like a dog. I seriously had a phone that they gave me, and a month's worth of phone use was gone in 2 weeks. That's how much I was using it. And I was always on this phone. I was working from like 5 or 6 in the morning sometimes. Maybe if I was lucky, I could sleep until about 8. And I was working until about 11, 12 at night. And I was almost
Mm.
constant work. I was setting up convoys. We would send like 1.5 convoys a week. That's how frequent we were sending them. And I was just calling contractors and asking them if they can give me, they can text me a bid for 10 trucks. And then I would send that notice to all the companies that I had dealings with. And occasionally I'd go into town, I'd knock on doors, and I'd sit down and drink the chai tea with the locals, the business owners, and eat their dates and chat with them and talk
Yeah.
to and find out if they have transportation companies or oil tank companies, and because
Wow.
sometimes we needed to push oil and fuel. So it was interesting. But this story is fun because this is the story of when my wife went into labor. So I was
So,
actually, yeah, I, so
oh man.
for the record, I missed 2 kid uh, deliveries. 2 of my kids, I missed their deliveries. So, and
Wow.
it's unfortunate. One of them I only missed for a few
Man.
months, and the other one I missed for about 8 months, and it was a big challenge. Um, they're both challenges. It's a challenge to be away from family and home, but it's really challenging when your wife is going through something and you're on the other side of the planet. But I was in this meeting with um, with a guy who, now they call this place Kurdistan. It's northern Iraq, but really it's Kurdish people. And he spoke Kurdish. And he had assistants who spoke, and his assistants are from India or Bangladesh or some a location over there, probably India. Or actually, no, I think they might have been from Asia, um, or the other part of Asia. But uh, very nice girls. And
Yeah.
they were his assistants, and they spoke English and Kurdish. So they were the intermediaries between us. But this particular day, I had the French Special Forces guy there, and he was paying his bill for the trucks. So I
Right.
was translating from French to English, and then the girls were translating from English to Kurdish. And that's how we were communicating. But
Wow.
my
Ah,
phone my phone rang, and or vibrated, and I looked at it, and it's a little funny to say it out loud, but it was a foreign number to me. I was just so used to seeing the numbers of the region, right?
right.
That
Right.
when I see my own home phone number,
Ah,
it looked like a foreign number to me because
yeah.
my wife never really called me. She never called me. And so we always communicated by other means, and it was just fine. I left that phone as the emergency for her, but otherwise it was business.
Sure.
But she called me, but it was so foreign to me, I dismissed it and put it aside. So after
Oh man.
communicating with the group a little bit more, I had the afterthought to look at the phone again. And so I looked at the phone, and then I realized it was my wife. And then I
Yeah.
excused myself and asked if I could find a private place to talk. And he said, "Yeah, go ahead and speak on the walkout patio, which is um, it is the second floor, so it has air conditioning. It was not a pretty place, but it overlooked the city, and it was a decent city. So I'm overlooking the city, and I'm talking to my wife, and she's telling me how she's just gone into labor, and we're chatting about what she's supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. She knows exactly what she's supposed to do, but at what stage she's in, what would be advisable, and the kid before this one that was born, she was born on the freeway, and so we didn't want my
What?
wife to deliver on the freeway
Yeah.
without me there, because at least I would feel fairly confident that I could handle it because I got through it once. But I didn't want to put anybody else through that, so we're talking about it. But the freeway story is a fun one too, but that's not military. But
Mhm.
we're chatting, and then she gets off the phone and she puts things in motion, the plans that we discussed. And it's the middle of the day for me and the middle of the night for her. And so I go back into the meeting, and they're all just looking at me. Um, and then the girls immediately say, I think you should name her this. And so now they're talking about
Oh
how I'm going
yeah,
to name the baby. And
right.
and of course they offer up their own names. And then so we have this discussion, and then we wrap up the meeting, and then we get in the car and go back. So the rest of the day was kind of a restless day for me because it was a very
Sure.
long labor for my
Wow.
wife. But I did eventually get her on video chat, and my niece who was there, she filmed the whole thing. So I was able to watch the entire. It's funny because I was in the Special Forces camp
Yeah.
where we had all the Special Forces operators, and some of them were sunbathing up on their containerized
Huh.
housing units, and others were just walking back and forth, without their shirts because that's all they do. They walk around without their shirts on.
Huh.
That's whenever they aren't
Right.
doing their active job and geared up like crazy, then to the nines, then they're without their shirts doing something, either
Yeah.
flexing or sunbathing. I don't know.
Right. Oh man.
That's the
Um.
story of learning about my wife going into labor.
Wow. And Dave, I always forget, how many kids do you have?
I have 8 kids.
8 kids. So for my audience, he did miss a couple of them, but he's got 8 kids, so he's still got a pretty good track record. So,
I do.
he's doing well. Well, Dave,
Number
let me
9 is on
shift.
the way.
Oh, seriously? Did I
Yeah.
know this?
No.
I don't even. Oh, congrats, dude. When?
Well, we'll find out boy or girl tomorrow. So she's a little bit far along in September.
What the heck? Awesome, brother.
Yeah.
Well, congrats, man. Again.
Thanks.
Awesome. Hey, Dave, I wanted to shift a little bit here.
Go for
This
it.
is kind of I ask a couple of questions always to my guests because my audience wants to know about influence and leadership, and you've had a wealth of experience just in everything that you do, both in your military and your civilian life. But um, you know, is there an experience that you can that you can say, man, these really shaped me into the person of influence that I am? Like all these things that you've done, Dave, what has that done for you as being a person
Yeah.
of influence?
That's a great question. I think that's an important question, not just for me. I mean, for everybody, because we all have those staples of influence and shifting influences, right? Um, what I know this is a question, a follow-up question that you often give would be, who influenced me, right? So I can answer
That's
them
it.
two together. So um,
Yeah.
one of the typical answers would be my dad, right? And of course, my dad had a very strong influence on me. But being raised in a family of 9, I have a lot of siblings to draw from too. Now, listen,
Right.
I think that anybody provides value and can provide value. I work in a federal prison right now, so even in that environment, among my staff member coworkers um, and even among the inmates, that you can pull value. It might be that you're looking at somebody and saying, I mean, that's a negative thing. I don't want to go in that route. Or that's a terrible example, and I know not to do that.
Right.
But what I think shaped me, and certainly there are some things, and I can reflect on that a little bit, but it's just trying to look at the positive of everybody. And I think there's so much value in that. When you look at somebody and say, all right, this is a negative scenario and you are at the base of it, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume that your intentions were better than this. Well, then that changes your perspective as the
Right.
recipient of that information. So now what I'm doing is I am thinking about that person differently, and I'm learning something from that person, and I'm learning something about me. So, and even better than that, though, there are a lot of us who do good things. So what you could do is say, I admire and appreciate what you're doing there, and I think I can learn something from that. So I think that we can learn from everyone around us. But specifically, yes, my dad shaped me. Obviously,
Mm.
everybody's father should be there to shape their children.
Yeah.
And if they are in the picture and as they should be, well, then they should instill wisdom as much as they can. They should want their offspring to be better than they are and have better than they have. And that doesn't
Yeah.
mean, giving everything, because obviously if we don't have the opportunity to fight for what we have, we don't value it as much and we don't learn as much. I think that there's value, a lot of value in struggle. So I think
Yeah.
there's that too. I think that another person in my life who has shaped me probably the most of everybody else is my wife, because, um, for example, and this is the one I was going to allude to, but or talk about, when I asked my father-in-law, for his permission to marry his daughter, he said no. And now listen,
I didn't know that.
he said no for good reasons though. And that's one of the first things that really, not first things, that's one of the most impacting, shaping moments of my life.
Yeah.
Because what he said was true. He said, "You are not ready." Now, he and we were friends. I mean, we're talking, when I went over to their house, I would sit on the couch and just visit with him. He's passed away, but he was such a wonderful man with just so much knowledge and wisdom, and just a cool guy. I really appreciated him. But when he said no, he said, "You are not ready. I would like, um, my daughter to marry somebody who has more things lined up." And he
Mm.
wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong. Um, I told my wife that story, and she laughed at first, and she said, "Well, we're doing it anyway." So we ended up just doing it anyway. Obviously, we got married, but that did shape me. And that was a shaping moment. So what that did for me was that got me to realign, reevaluate where I was headed and how I was headed there, as far as my job and as far as my education. I ended up going back to finish my bachelor's degree, which incidentally did not really do much for my career, but
Yeah.
it was a focal point. And going back to get my degree, I don't think having the degree was the result I needed. I think going through the process was the result I needed, because that was more
Right.
shaping. And also, my job changed. Well, I was in the entertainment business before, and it was a family business. And that got me to realize, you know what? As hard as it might be, I need to tell my dad this is not my future, because there is no future to support a family for the two of us, let alone for me and what I have planned
Wow.
for my family. So I had to tell my dad, which was a tough time. I had to tell him I need to make a change. So I
Yeah.
started shopping around, and I was already in the military at this point, but I started shopping around for a next career. And I found that in carpentry, and I was a finished carpenter for about 5 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
honestly, I as difficult as that might have been at certain times, because that also didn't end up being my family career,
Mhm.
for various reasons. But it is something that I fall back on. I have those skills, and I use them all the time. And that was also a shaping thing, because uh, I that got me to understand that we can do just about anything we want to do if we just do a
Right.
little research and a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of fortuitousness, and if we just do it and want to do it, then we could do just about anything we want,
Yeah.
including build a library, or do all the plumbing in your kitchen sink and all that stuff. You could do it. You just have to
Right.
um, rewire all your electrical. I mean, you could do it. You could do it. So
You know.
those are shaping moments for me.
Yeah. I appreciate that that answer. And I've been over to Dave's house before, and he's got a pretty cool setup in his garage for carpentry. And I've been in his house when his kitchen was totally torn up, and then it came back later on when it was all brand new. So, like, kudos to Dave for being so handy. Hey, what's a book, Dave, that you are either
Hmm.
reading right now or you have read that you would tell my audience, hey, this might be a book that you want to pick up?
Okay. That's a good question too. I mean, I've read a lot of books, not nearly as many as my kids. My kids are,
Ah,
they just inhale them. But, and my wife too. She is the top reader in the household. But, I have read a lot of books. And I would say, well, the book I'm currently finishing right now is just in the Dune series, which is, of course, a nonfiction. And, there's value in just about any book, especially those that were written in the 60s and whatnot, the 40s and 60s or whatever. But I would say some of the books that I think about the most, or the ones that I've read and reread and reread and reread, all right, there are a couple books. There's one, 12, um, 12 Rules for Life, uh, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan Peterson.
right. Yeah.
That one I believe I really listened to that audiobook about 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
I did. It's a great book. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in organizing yourself before you try to organize others. And I think there's a
Right.
lot of people out there who can learn by these 12 rules. It's a great book, and I referred it to a lot of people. And I had my son in the car most of the times when I read that, because we had season passes to the ski slopes, and I was teaching him how to snowboard. And to and from, we would always listen to that book. Just when we finished it, we started over. Then we chat about it, and it was great. Loved it. Great book,
Well,
a lot of great material. Dan Crenshaw, the congressman, he's written a book
yeah.
about his time in the SEALs. And he likens it to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules, An Antidote to Chaos. He likened it to that because he basically has the 12 rules in it as well.
Wow.
But
Okay.
besides that, a nonfiction book that I really enjoyed, that I remember more than most books, is just Charles Dickens' David Copperfield. Because Charles Dickens is a master with language, and specifically the storyline. You have a child who, he comes from a decent family, but then he loses it all, and then he goes into a terrible family situation, and then he rebuilds himself. So it teaches me that you can overcome just about all obstacles. You just have to stick with something.
Yeah, well, I would say that's exactly what we talk about here, Rising Tide. Well, Dave, I'm at the end of all my my podcasts, I usually give Mo's final thoughts. But today, do you have any final thoughts of wisdom or encouragement for the listeners?
Final thoughts to the listeners. Thank you for listening to the end of this. I appreciate it. And well, I don't know if you're familiar with Louis L'Amour books, but Louis L'Amour, he's another classic. And to quote Johannes Verne, I am not afraid. I am Johannes Verne. I am not afraid. And so I would say his final words to your audience, go out there and be better. And we can always be better. I don't care how great you think you are. I guarantee you're not as great as others think you are. And what you need to do is just be better people and do your best to enlift those around you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Dave. We're definitely going to have you back on. There's, a million stories that we didn't even get to touch, and I think my audience would love to hear that. And again, you and I have been talking about doing stuff for years now, and so I'm just excited that we got to sit down and do this. So, thanks for being a part of the podcast today. And to our audience, thanks for tuning into the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time for more insights on becoming a leader who can make a difference. Until then, keep leading with purpose and passion. We'll see you next time.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, boy.